Who can remind me what our driving question is for this whole project? What do we really mean? I'm going to call in a couple friends to tell me our driving question. Mason, can you start it off?
Our driving question is, how can we as kids enforce our rights and powers?
Kaden?
How can we as kids have our own choice and power?
How can we have our own choices? How can we have our own power at school? McKinley?
How can we as students have more voice and power?
Now, why is it important that we want to have more voice and power? What is that even for? We introduced the writing, the official writing piece, midway through the project. At that point, the students have been very upset. They have had their equipment taken away. They have been taxed. They were being taxed on paper. They had to use stamps they had to pay for. They were being taxed to use the equipment. Sometimes they were being taxed to use the restroom. And so at this point, they were getting very, very upset and using that anger and that emotion, bubbling that up to talk about what can we do? How can we remedy this? How can we have more power and let our voices be heard? So we kind of let that build up in the students with all of those simulations. And from there, we talked about, well, what do they do at other schools? Why would it just be, we can fix things at our own school. So bringing in what's happening in the real world or trying to probe them in that direction of finding real world connections. And then at that point, students had seen enough of the social studies content that they were starting to make connections between what was happening to them in school and what was also happening to the colonists in the Revolutionary War. How can we begin this process of getting more rights and power? Think about our need to knows. What are we going to need to research? What are we going to need to find out in order to redesign? Logan?
We need to know how we're going to get this started and how we're going to finish it.
Absolutely, and I can give you that information. But what else will we need to research to find out how we can redesign our learning environment? Because we could come up with some ideas from our mind, but surely that's not the only way. There have to be things that are happening in the world right now that we can pull from and conduct research on. Haley.
Maybe we could look up other schools that have students have a lot of power, and then we can research that, and then we could
Okay, so pause.
put that into our.
Why don't we research what other schools are doing around the country? Because surely New Hope is not the only school that wants to empower their kids and see them make their own choices and become their own people. The learning map supports the initial construction of knowledge, getting them ready for the eventual opinion redesign writing. They're looking at identifying different components of mentor opinion writing texts. They are beginning to draft sample opinion writing pieces on their own and getting feedback. And again, constantly modeling and looking at mentor texts throughout those first beginning weeks. And then they write their final opinion essay, and in that there's the component of research where students are researching both the model schools that are doing innovative practices, and they're also researching what the colonists were doing as well. So we have a research component that's a little bit guided for the students, so there's a research page that goes with that, and then there is a feedback component to the research piece, so students actually engage in critical friends based on their research and their initial ideas to get feedback.
My favorite redesign idea is give kids more rights and power. I think we need to get a special app to track our learning.
So me and my classmates can have more rights and powers.
I'm going to pause you, McKinley. I love that you are specifically referencing the source with which you got your information. Can you explain, I see your first redesign idea is that college students come in and teach you different subjects. Can you explain to me how that positively impacts kids? How does having college students in impact the learning in their classroom, do you think?
Well, some teachers, like you, your enthusiasm is really, it makes us learn better sometimes, but if they're like a boring teacher and just open your textbooks and this is what's going to happen, you can't really, they don't express as much as they probably.
So how would your model school bringing in professionals and bringing in college students, how would that shift? If we're looking at the learning target, how did you connect the integration of technology with the colonists' pursuit to freedom? What was your connection between technology and the colonists' pursuit to freedom?
Well, the colonists, they didn't really have as much freedom. I'm guessing that even making middle school kids, before this happened, with the technology and developing it, it wasn't as much freedom. In some classes in 4th grade, it's not as much freedom you have to do things.
With the critical friends piece, there are 2 places where we try to bring in more professionals to give kids feedback. So once they've done the research piece, they do engage with Critical Friends with a peer, but we also brought in adults that were working in the county because we're talking about redesigning the classroom. So we did have a conversation with students about who are the stakeholders that make the decisions that would allow you to make these changes. They talked about the principal, the assistant principal, we talked about the assistant superintendent, we talked about the personalized learning coaches that we have in the county, the Board of Education, and so we were able to get those professionals to come into the room and provide feedback on their redesign ideas, both at the research place and their final writing piece. So they actually were given feedback both from a peer and from a professional at 2 points, and then they ultimately presented their final drafts in front of the assistant superintendent and the administration at our school.
I think we should have a legislator in our class, because if we have the freedom of government, then we can make our own laws and our own rule, and we can outrule the laws. Now this connects to the colonists, because they wanted to have a legislature and have a senate, and they wanted to have the things that we want to have: freedom, the freedom to make laws. And this reflects my model school, because they had a legislature that was by grades and behavior, with the teacher as a senate and 5 or 4 students as the House of Representatives.
All right, Scotty, so it's like having a student council.
Correct.
Okay, and what types of things would you want the students to make laws about or inform decisions for the school?
Well, the informing could be things like the school, not like the class schedule, and the laws could be like separate rules from the standard laws of the hallway.
Okay.
And we could make laws about in the classroom, like in Miss Tom's class, they have the whispering thing, and maybe we can apply that in the classroom and things like that.
Okay, so kind of like a class constitution.
Correct.
Okay. All right.